I mean, it's always, you see it all the time.
Yeah,
Everybody
yeah.
wants to get into business with their friends, and I will tell you that I have seen out of all my clients, a very, very small portion of them actually start as friends and continue to be friends throughout the process.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Oh, cool. So, all right. Now, I'm wondering if we can let's push this out a little bit further in terms of development cycle, or let's say the game is getting ready, and or even whether it's in beta or even pre-launch. The devs are getting out there to promote their game and their marketing. Now, as they get into this, is there like any particular areas that they should be aware of? Like, is there anything that from a legal perspective that when indie devs are promoting their game, that they should be fully aware of? And I'm sure we'll dive into some specific topics, but like, what are things that most people will think that, oh, I'm just out on Twitter, I'm getting my game out there, or maybe I'm using some paid advertising? What type of stuff should they be aware of when they start getting into actual marketing their game?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I've seen, because in my experience, indie devs have a very small initial advertising budget. So they rely on giving keys to YouTubers, to streamers, people within the industry, trying to get sort of a buzz created before they start launching, say, traditional advertising methods like video ads or banner ads, etc. Um, these people are now dubbed influencers.
Yep.
And you have to be very careful as a company working with influencers, because you need to make sure you set the boundaries upfront day one, that they need to be aware that they have to completely disclose the relationship with you, that you had given them that key. Now, whether they're biased or not, that's going to be for their audience to decide. I have rarely come across a biased YouTuber because they were given a free product. But it needs to be disclosed, because if they don't disclose it, it's on you.
Mm.
I'll give you a fantastic example. There was the case that really set this off, and it's unfortunate that the case that set this off had to do with video games, was Warner Brothers and a Lord of the Rings game called Shadow of Mordor.
Yep.
And what happened in this case is Warner Brothers reached out to a couple of streamers and sent them various codes and keys, and this was YouTube primarily at this time.
Yep.
And a particular group posted a bunch of videos about them playing the game. And what they did is they failed to disclose the relationship between them and Warner Brothers. And everyone's familiar with the view more button on YouTube videos. They hid the view now all the way at the bottom. The relationship that this game was given to them for free. And the FTC had a shit fit. Here's a company that is actively promoting a product, that actively has a financial interest with these particular individuals who received an incentive to do this, and they are not disclosing that to the general public, and they are deceiving them, whether that was their intent or not.
Right.
They viewed it as they are deceiving the general public, and that's an issue. Initially, it fell back onto the company. So in this case, it fell back onto Warner Brothers. They were hit with a massive multi-million-dollar fine for this. Now, and this is for anyone who's listening who's not just a game dev, but maybe also an influencer or do that kind of work on the side, they're turning on the influencers as well. They're basically saying, look, it's been a few years. We understand that this type of marketing has exploded. You are now just as responsible if you're not playing by the rules like the companies are.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes complete sense. And I mean, in some ways, too, it kind of does go into an ethical aspect. I mean, I know the example that you were providing, it wasn't necessarily like, I mean, we're not here to discuss whether it was their intent or not, but let's say it's still plausible that it wasn't their intent. But in general, too, it's probably just, good practice just to be like, to be transparent with how you're doing things. And clearly, too, there's also a legal side of it as well. So you're right. It is really interesting how that has kind of, come to head and is very prominent now, especially when you have people reaching out to influencers to try to help them promote their game. So.
Yeah, and one of the rules that I live by when I advise clients, and I'm shifting this mindset to them, is that an informed customer is a better customer.
Yeah.
Don't go for the low-hanging fruit. Get the loyal, get the informed individual, because there will not be issues down the road of them saying, I was tricked into buying this, I was tricked into signing up for this, I was tricked into signing up for your DLC, getting your seasons pass, your battle pass, whatever you want to call it. Be upfront of what it is, be upfront of what it costs, and you'll find that you might lose those low-hanging fruit sales, but you'll have longer-lasting customer relationships and a better reputation with customers in the long run than you would trying to play games.
Yeah, and not only that, a lot of times, too, what people don't realize is the people that are saying things, there's probably like 7 times more that aren't saying anything. So it could be kind of, by the time you start realizing that something like that could have been set in motion, it's going to be too late to kind of like backtrack anyways. So, I mean, that's another way to look at it too. But more importantly, like you said, you nailed it. Just saying, I mean, if you're in this game and doing this for sustainability, well, then making sure you have that loyal fan base and being transparent with them, because that's more important than anything else. So, right on there.
Absolutely. And you see this issue come up a lot with loot boxes and with microtransactions. You see it both in indie devs, with mobile games. You see it with AAA studios. Be transparent. It's either you become more transparent, or you're going to see government entities and regulatory bodies come in and force you to be.
Yeah, definitely. All right. One thing I want to cover on this before on the marketing side before we go a little bit into our next section is so that makes sense to make sure that your influencers are disclosing information and everything. But what about something as simple? And I know I'm not trying to open up a can of worms here, but what's something that could be as simple as just collecting email subscribers so you can just shoot them your monthly dev blog update or whatever.
Ooh. So you're avoiding opening up a can of worms, but you just did.
I'm sorry.
And it's funny because you would think that's something as easy as collecting email addresses, or not something easy, but something as basic as collecting just email addresses, maybe attach somebody's name so you can send like a happy birthday if you want to collect their birthday address. Real basic information wouldn't be that big of a deal, but that goes with what you and I were talking about earlier, is that privacy is becoming a huge issue in this country. And if you don't get informed consent when collecting email addresses, if you try to trick someone for say into signing up for a mailing list, you're going to have extensive problems. And one of the big things about that is just going back to what we were saying earlier. Be transparent. Have a privacy policy, not one that you downloaded off the internet, but one that is drafted based upon what your actual practices are on your website that people can see. Follow the opt-out rules in can spam. Make sure that all these requirements are there. You'll find again that you'll have that better reputation. It's more work to do things right, but the payoff is so much better. So yeah, making sure your privacy policies are tied up, making sure that everything is disclosed in them. Although some of the lower, just starting out, smaller budget indie devs out there might not have to concern themselves today with the new California privacy law that's going into effect early next year. But you're going to see a world relatively soon where if you're in the United States, there's going to be 50 states with 50 different privacy laws that are all going to look like what California has passed or what is going on in the EU right now with GDPR. And that is a whole other can of worms.
Yes, we won't get into that. But to kind of like the best I can summarize this is basically that just make sure, like you said, privacy policy, make sure you're just fully disclosing in terms of, hey, this is why I'm collecting your information. You can also view it on the privacy policy, and there's a lot of information out there too, but more importantly is just as long as you're disclosing that information, and probably another thing is how, you should be fairly covered. But don't take my word for it. Make sure you also like do your homework and everything else, and contact those like people like Zach that know better about those type of topics. But to summarize it, those are the things you got to do. All right, so moving things a little bit forward, I want to ask you one more question before we kind of come to a close, and it's and I'm sure this is probably a big one that people always ask is like, when you're having talks with publishers, and like, obviously, I mean, I think for everybody that's like totally a time when, yes, that's probably the one time that they think that they need for definitely legal representation. And now when you're negotiating contracts with publishers, like how important is it to get that representation from like a lawyer when you're having discussions with a publisher?
I cannot stress the importance of it enough. I have had clients of mine who thought particular provisions were within their publishing deals, and they just weren't. I like publishers. I have clients that are publishers, and I don't want to offend any of the listeners. I disagree with that model, and I think that model is slowly dying out. If you can afford to complete your game without taking anyone else's money, whether it be a publisher or an investor, you are no longer selling a part of your business to them. You're no longer giving up control. You're no longer giving up creative control. Do it. If you can do it on your own, do it. There is this notion that is in the video game world that is slowly dying, but it's still very prevalent in the startup community, is that I need to get fundraising. I need to raise money, and nobody will take me seriously unless I've raised $1 million. That's just not true. When people are raising money, when they're going to investors, when they're talking with publishers, what they're doing is selling their business, not their product, but they're selling part of their business. They're entering into revenue share agreements where they're giving up 50% of their revenue. They're entering into agreements where they're giving up 40, 30, 60% of the business to someone else. All your hard work, and if you can do it on your own, do it. If you can't do it on your own and you need these things, make sure you have legal representation, negotiating, reviewing these contracts, making sure that your best interests are protected.
Yeah, because I think that goes two ways. I mean, like you said, if you can make your game yourself and stuff, like really, really consider, what other steps you can take without having to give that up. Because like, let's say, just worst case scenario, you end up working with, a publisher, and they don't, they're unable to follow through with, what everybody essentially wanted. I mean, nobody wants to fail essentially, but it still happens even with publishers. And let's say whatever those terms you agreed upon, what position would you be better in? If you did it yourself and failed, or with a publisher? Because if with yourself, you still have everything. You just have to kind of pick yourself up and move again. But with a publisher, there might be terms in there that state like you can't do X, Y, or Z things for a certain amount of time, or if there's certain licensing on like coding or stuff, they could use stuff of your game even though there's nothing happening with it. And
absolutely, and you end up selling these things without realizing it. And you're in a situation now, a great example that you just gave. If you sign with a publisher and your game fails, depending on what you may have sold the rights to that entire IP. Mm. They drop you as one of their studios, and they go off and hire someone else who can create what you already spent years working on. Why give something like that up? There are so many fantastic new ways for fundraising that doesn't require that. I was reading an article the other day that Kickstarter has raised over $1.3 billion for video games in just that category alone. The market is there. If you can deliver a product, people will buy it. The market is there.
Yeah, and on the flip side too, because I don't want us to necessarily, and I know you have clients too that are like publishers and stuff too, but on the flip side, sometimes there are certain either objectives you may have as a developer or a studio that you have, and let's just face it, there's no way that you can, tackle everything that that you're looking to go for. And some publishers either have relationships or expertise in certain areas that can provide a lot of value to your game. But still, even with that, like you said, making sure that you have a full understanding and everything's really buttoned up on your end, and it's as fair as you as a studio or a dev can have it be in terms